Hello, this is my little friend, the Little Prince, and I'm Alan Twigg in Vancouver, Canada. For the Alice in Wonderland stories, there was a real-life counterpart for Alice. And of course, for the Winnie the Pooh stories by A.A. Milne, there was a real-life counterpart for Christopher Robin. There are three known storylines as to how Antoine de Saint-Exupéry might have modeled the physical look of his character, the Little Prince. And today, we're going to introduce you to a little known, in fact unknown, fourth possibility as to why the Little Prince looks the way he does. Of course, the Little Prince is universal. That's what's so amazing about this story, even though it's a hard to understand story. It's one of the most translated books in the history of literature. Well, here we are in downtown Vancouver, and as you can see, it's Christmas time. Merry Christmas. And we're going to be heading into the United Kingdom building to see a man named Phil Boname. I've never met him before, so it's going to be interesting. Here's your friend back again. This is the irreplaceable Joseph Voss, and he's going to be talking to Phil with me. Bonjour. Pleased to meet you.
Grand plaisir. Grand plaisir.
We brought along a little friend.
Oh my
Yes.
God, I'm gonna cry.
Well, let's see.
That's
Oh
amazing.
yes, it's amazing. Covers out. Have you read the book?
It's
Yes.
known around the world.
Oh, you've around the world? You've heard of it though.
Yes, yes, I
What
have.
year were you born and where were you born?
I was born in Paris on the 6th of May, 1934.
And when did you meet the author of The Little Prince?
Well, we met on numerous occasions, but the first time would have been in a place called Biscarrosse, which is south of Arcachon, which is south of Bordeaux, Bay of Biscay. Met him because he and my father were both involved in aeronautics.
And how old were you then approximately when you
It would have
first
been
saw it?
1938, 39, 4 and 5 years old. The first time because we met more frequently in New York later on to come to. But at Biscarrosse we met a few times. I used to go over with my father to look at these gigantic Dorniers, a very famous German designed seaplanes, 2 or 3 stories with 6 engines, 4 on the leading edge and 2 pushers on the after edge of these enormous aircraft, as big as the Mars flying Pan Am Clippers.
So do you have clear memories of Saint-Exupéry?
I have a very good memory of Saint-Exupery. He was a formidable individual. My father always spoke very highly of him. Saint-Ex was 6 years older than my father, but they were comrade in arms, both having come up through aviation. My father as an aeronautical engineer, Saint-Ex more as a pilot. And indeed, on one of the experimental flights, and this is what they were doing, they were experimenting with different ways of getting to and from New York City. LaGuardia had a seaplane base, and they were exploring different routes in terms of headwinds, in terms of fuel consumption, and you couldn't do it non-stop. They'd go up to Ireland and then over to Mykonos and then down to LaGuardia, or the southern route, which would be through the Azores and Bermuda and then up to LaGuardia. And on one of those flights, Saint-Ex actually was on board. He flew over to New York and then back with the team. It was all very exploratory and quite fascinating.
So he knew at an age when you yourself had very noticeable blonde curls, is that correct?
Well, as you can see perhaps from this is a copy of an oil painting, which I think was taken of myself when I was either 4 or 5 years old, which may have been maybe a year before when I actually first met Saint-Exupery. But not to get too far ahead of our story here, but I met him much more frequently when he was actually writing the book in New York City. But before we leave Biscarrosse, this is a picture which I thought I should share with you, which shows my father, who was the general manager of the seaplane base, and some famous pilots. This is Guillaume, which is featured in one of Saint-Ex's books. I think it's Beau de Nuit, but in any event, this was taken at the base in the south of France, southwest France. And indeed, if you go to Biscarrosse today, there's a museum there that commemorates all of this pioneering seaplane activity. This picture happens to be on view there as well, as well as many other pictures of Saint-Exupery and pictures of the flying boats, which were extraordinary apparatuses at the time, three-deckers. And I remember sitting up in the cockpits, and I don't know if you remember pictures of Howard Hughes and his goose,
Yeah.
goose, how large the cockpit was. Mind you, I was a child, so everything was much larger, but it was quite fascinating to sit up there in the cockpits. So yeah, those were very exciting times.
And so you knew him later on when your family was living in North America.
That's
And
correct.
so during the period when he was writing The Little Prince, did you see him often, or was that
Well,
just once in a while?
I'm going to reveal something that has never been, to my knowledge, addressed. Because Saint-Ex, of course, has been the subject of many biographies. Some of them extensively researched, and indeed you'll find reference to my father, and not extensively, but he appears in one or two of the books. But what has never come out, to the best of my knowledge, is the fact that the two of them collaborated on exploring the development of a new form of ship which was intended to rid Western Europe of the Nazis. So we have to understand that for a period of several years, there was some enormous concern as to how the Nazis would be pushed back, how would we free up Europe. And one manifestation of that was, in fact, Howard Hughes, together with Edgar Kaiser, building the Spruce Goose. They designed to take 1,000 troops in one aircraft, but it had planned to have many aircraft. And so, I'm not exaggerating. There are a lot of engineers and a lot of creative thinking going into how to mass an enormous armada of people to Europe. So we have these two people with an aviation background, my father and Saint-Ex. We were now living in Long Island, and we came out in 1941. My family came out in 40, my father came out in 1941. And he and Saint-Ex developed this idea of creating a stealth semi-submarine ship that would be on the surface, undetectable by radar, and operated by dynamos, electric engines that were themselves, the dynamo was activated by large vanes that were activated by waves. And so we were building these models in our basement.
Mm-hmm.
And we were living in Great Neck, New York, which is east of LaGuardia. Saint-Ex had an apartment in Manhattan, as well as a beautiful home on the water's edge of Long Island Sound, a bit further east of us. And I was one of the children who my father would take along to go out to see Saint-Ex at the house. And the model went from 6 inches to 6 feet, and it never really worked too well. But there's a story there about how they had collaborated on trying to come up with a system that I suppose in their creative thinking would result in an armada of these stealth quasi-submarines that would approach Europe undetected and deposit thousands of troops.
Well, there is a connection because, of course, many people have written about The Little Prince, analyzing it as a book which really arose from his trauma about being separated from France. And he was desperate to do something. He needed to get back in action. And so he was trying to do something with your father, but ultimately ended up doing something psychologically by creating this rather strange metaphoric work.
My speculation on the derivation, or shall we say the genesis of the book, has to do with his times when he was marooned in the desert, Morocco, and one or two other places where he had to spend unfortunate nights waiting to be rescued. And so here you are, starlit surrounding, and a lot of time to think and meditate, reflect on the world. The actual writing of the book took place on the second floor of a famous restaurant which still exists and which I go to frequently in Manhattan, called La Grenouille, which means the frog. And it's one of the more famous French restaurants in Manhattan. And I encourage anyone who has the appetite for good French food to go there. On the mezzanine level is where, see, Saint-Ex had an apartment in town as well as a house out in Long Island. And most of the writing was done with a glass of red wine and a good meal at La Grenouille. And I'd see him in New York City with my father on several occasions. He was a quiet individual. He didn't necessarily embrace a lot of time with children. His mind was preoccupied with bigger things, bigger interests. But I was always awestruck in his presence. And I knew that I was in the company of someone very important. Incidentally, as Frenchmen go, he was quite tall and quite a foreboding experience. Now, outside the building, on the wall, is a plaque that you can see today, 52nd Street, if my memory serves me correctly, and it says this is the location where the Petit Prince was written. And that was unveiled by my father when he was 99 years old, about 15 years ago. And so I like to take my wife to the restaurant and pay homage to the plaque that my father unveiled in honor of his friend.
Do you think your father might have been privy to the creative process as it was happening?
Oh, yes.
They talked together about the story that he was
I
writing?
can't say that I was privy to those discussions, but they were together so extensively that my father would have been very much aware of the fact that Saint-Ex was writing this book. You made reference to the fact that Saint-Ex wanted to get back into action, and my father was very much aware of that as well. An enormous amount of pressure was put on the U.S. Air Force through various connections because he was over age. He had accidents. They didn't feel that he was fit to fly, but as an homage to, shall we say, a fairly well-known individual, even then, as an author and pilot, they said, sure, we'll get you back in the action.
Did your father ever bring up the idea that the way that the Little Prince looks might have been modeled upon you as a young boy at the time?
We've never discussed that, and I've never thought necessarily that I was physically the model, as much as maybe had some influence as being a child, that he probably the only person about the prince's age that was around him at the time that he was writing.
He never had children of his own?
No.
So therefore you would be, not in theory, but in practice, the child that was closest to him in his life.
But as you well know, in terms of the book, it's not so much the child as it is the spirit. It's the whole concept of youthfulness, imagination, creativity, that he's imbuing into this boy, which I think is quite what makes the story so worldwide successful.
Do you recall how old you were when you were first encountering the story?
So my experiences off and on run from no earlier than the age of 4, and more likely 5 when we were in Biscarrosse, the south of France, up to 1944, when I would have been 10 years old. And so we saw each other quite frequently during that age span of 4 to 10. And he was writing most of that book in Manhattan in late 43, 1944.
So did your parents read the story to you?
Oh, sure. Once it was published, yes. That came much later, though.
I just bought this in Israel at the
Did you really?
at Ben Gurion Airport. It's the Little Prince in Hebrew.
Were you there recently?
Yeah, in August.
With
Yeah.
Bill Ross, by any chance?
No, I
Because I was supposed to go on that tour with him, and I
Oh.
couldn't fit it into my schedule. Of course, I should know better.
Here.
Yes, of course. You read the right thing. I was trying to do it badly.
But,
Isn't this amazing that you should have this?
yeah.
and it's in very good shape.
And Alan, you said it was translated and Phil
Yeah.
said it outside the Bible, it's the most translated book.
The most published book in the world.
Most public,
But
wow.
also, as Alan says, it's, no other book has had more translations.
There's many strange
47
languages
languages.
you've never heard of. Like in northern Corsica, there's a language, and they've translated it, you know. And,
So,
in
so-
Esperanto, it's in Esperanto.
Yes?
We were talking about
beautiful.
certain other, I guess, characters that at one time they were certainly archetypal, or as you said, they were symbolic, but they've become in a way more real than the
As
person
time
on the
passes,
street.
Yes.
So of course the pieces
Hobbit.
like the Hobbit, and that's an early edition of the Hobbit, and the Harry Potter that
Yes.
for that generation, and this is a signed first edition by J.K. Rowling.
Wow.
Yeah.
And signed.
And she's very careful with her signature. She did this, I bought this at auction along with the complete set of the Harry Potters. She did it as a fundraiser for a young girl who was raising money, I think it was for a hospital. They had a nice connection, and she signed it over, and then it was sold at auction until they raised the double. Of course, the Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
Yeah. And see now,
Amazing.
I wonder if because this became a bit of a franchise, the Wizard of Oz, and even after Frank Baum passed away, people took over writing in the spirit of Oz, and
Yes.
and you find that a lot.
You do. In
I
fact,
wonder if
the Hardy Boys, for example.
oh yeah.
It was passed out to different writers. McFarlane was, Frank Dixon was the name that it runs with the whole series,
Hmm.
but there are many authors who were Frank Dixon.
Oh, I didn't
Franklin-
know that.
Franklin
Most
W.
common was Brian McFarlane's father.
Ah.
I don't know if you recognize that name, Hockey Night in Canada.
Franklin W. Dixon was a made-up name.
That's correct.
Ah.
But the most common, the one who wrote most of the books was Frank McFarlane. I'm not sure if that's his first name, but last name was McFarlane. So that happened with this as well.
Do you think that Saint-Ex would have written a follow-up, or was that always a one-off?
Wow, great question. My immediate reaction is that it was a one-off,
Hmm.
and it had to do with his philosophies more than perhaps trying to take the boy into another phase of life.
Ah.
But that's my speculation.
Did you ever meet his wife, who was
It's
supposedly
interesting you should
the
ask,
Rose?
because I have one of her paintings at home. She was a painter, she was a wild woman, and as you know, they didn't always get along too well. There was a lot of friction, unfortunately. Didn't see, I may have met her once, but they were not that close to each other in 43, 44.
It is said that the rose represents her.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, there was a time when it was very romantic, but Saint-Ex was not known for being the most arduous. He had other arrangements.
He was French.
Yes, exactly.
Attention, moi je suis français aussi.
Now, I brought two other volumes here that in the same idea of there's a Peter Pan there,
Yes,
and
yes.
now this is probably the most famous children's book of the last 150 years is Alice in Wonderland, and the Little Prince is way up there. So this Alice in Wonderland. This is the Through the Looking Glass.
I see.
And it's a signed edition by Alice Hargraves.
Mm.
Alice was the young girl that Lewis Carroll based the story on.
Yes.
She never like up to now, maybe you've shared the story with a few people here and there, and
Mhm.
we knew each other for 15, 20 years, introduced, I don't know if you remember, because I had forgotten, but by Chuck Davis at the
Oh, I
club.
knew Chuck
We-
very, very well.
We had, and also a very good friend of Alan's.
Very good friend of mine, very, very good friend of mine. Oh dear, so how did Chuck come into play?
I was just remembering about Chuck, wanted to
Yes.
mention his name. So, just as you maybe have not told the story to too many people, Alice never wanted to, what's the word, capitalize, to profit from being the original Alice.
Yes.
And later in life, when she was in her 80s, and she was in ill health and the finances had deteriorated, this is the Limited Editions Club, maybe 1934.
Mm.
They convinced her, they're based in Manhattan, they convinced her to come to New York and sign a limited number
Yes.
for subscribers of the book. And they had a ticker tape parade, tens of thousands of people down the streets of Manhattan. And she gave some talks in various places.
Amazing.
Thousands of people showed up. It was magic, the real Alice. Here, I'll show you her signature in the back, because it's very rare. And this is the only series of books that she ever signed. There we are.
Really? That's amazing. The only book she ever signed, you have it.
Like she signed maybe 250 or 300
Yes,
copies,
that's-
but this is, and now, then these here, which I also bought in Manhattan, are first editions of Alice, signed by the author.
Really?
These are, so Lewis Carroll, these were in
Yes.
his hands, the same as your copy here,
Right.
were signed by Saint-Exupery. Here's the Alice in Wonderland. This is the first English edition. Macmillan and Company, 1868, London. And let's see, where is it? It's probably,
There?
here we are. To Harriet and Selena Watson, from the author, within this storage.